Okay, we are good to go. Rolling. Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Welcome
Apologies
to
for starting a little bit late.
Yes.
We promised we weren't organizing exactly what the format of the session was going to be 2 minutes ago. But yeah, I'm going to shut up now and leave it to Pia and Kevin to talk a little about the motivations for FundOSS, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the round and how it went, and then we're going to have a bit of a panel conversation. But yeah, I'm not going to tell you about what's going to happen because we're just going to get on with it. Carry on.
Thanks,
Hi,
Benjam.
everyone. Thanks,
Hi,
Benjam.
everyone. So I'm Kevin Iwaki from Gitcoin. We've been prototyping democratic funding, then called quadratic funding in the Ethereum space, and we're very excited to be bringing democratic funding to the Open Collective and to the Web2 open source community. I'm very excited about the results of this pilot round.
Hi, all. I'm Pia Mancini, founder of Open Collective and Open Source Collective. Anything open and collect is probably my fault out there. So thank you all for participating in this experiment. I guess, motivations behind it. I was always like a big fan of the funding, the quadratic funding, or kind of the approach to funding public goods that Gitcoin has been pushing forward. I saw that as a really good mechanism to bring ideas into this world and to make things happen into this world, things that the community wants to see instead of like a hierarchical approach to funding public goods. And so I guess the motivation for FundOSS was seeing if we could start building a bridge between Web2 projects and this kind of, the Ethereum community way of approaching funding open source in their ecosystem. And so we've never tried this before. And we wanted to see, one of the things that I guess I was most attracted to here was figuring out if there's a path for us to reward critical projects or projects that those who are operating from the funders side of things are missing, but the community kind of signals that they are important, that they're critical, that they're necessary, that they want to see happening. And so for me, that's one of the things that I'm most interested in, the kind of democratic funding or quadratic funding mechanism. And this was all a big excuse to hang out with the Gitcoin crew and have fun and figure out a path to kind of bring both our worlds together. So yeah, this is where we are. I am super proud of what we've achieved. I have to say it was hard work, but Benjamin will show some numbers later, but I think it exceeded expectations. And I really hope that this is the first of a recurring way of funding our public commons in the Web2 ecosystem.
Yeah, I'll say, Pia, one of the things that we've seen in the Ethereum space, which is not perfect, but is just 10 experiments into doing quadratic funding. We've done 10 quarters of quadratic funding in the Ethereum space. Is that every quarter we iterate and try to take the community's feedback and make quadratic funding better than it was the last round. But the other thing that we've done is we've sort of entered into a cadence where the community knows that it's coming every quarter. And so, if you're running an open source project that was going to go do some consulting work or was going to raise some money, you can expect that quadratic funding will just be there next quarter as something that you can use to fundraise for your project. And that's become a really useful synergy between the Gitcoin team and the Ethereum community. So I hope to enter into that cadence with this community, but I don't know, we'll see what the feedback is after we do a retrospective, and hopefully we'll iterate past it and enter into that sort of cycle. So we'll see.
Yeah, if anything, it's a really good opportunity to kind of put the spotlight on the ecosystem and talk about it and talk about sustainability and kind of draw eyeballs onto what the projects are doing. So allowing the projects, it's also for me like, and I saw this time around, but it's also for me like a really good tool that we can give open source projects to kind of galvanize their communities. It's not easy in times where you can't meet face to face to have these kind of recurring moments where you reach out to your community and you kind of re-engage them. And this seems to be like a really good mechanism for that.
Yep, totally. Without further ado, should we talk about the round results?
Yeah.
We can definitely do that. Okay, cool. So hopefully everyone can see the presentation that we've got in front, which is just a kind of blank kind of presentation screen right now. If you can't see it, then just give me a shout because I'm new to presenting on AirMeet. But this is the big old figure. So this is the total, and we just want to kind of say thank you. I think everyone will back me up in saying that we have, massively exceeded our expectations in terms of participation, in terms of the amounts that we have seen being donated to the projects, especially considered the limited range of projects that we have invited into this round. So we had 55 projects that we accepted into the round, which we purposefully limited because we're learning, and we definitely want to broaden this in the next round, and that's something that we'll talk about later on. But yeah, like I'm super surprised to see that in total, so with $75,000 in match funding, we raised a total of $94,574, which is just under 100,000.
So close.
That's a thing. But the thing that I was most surprised was to see in like the final days, especially in the final 24 hours, we raised a significant amount from a broad range of people. So, and that's what it's all about, right? It's not necessarily about the amount that we raise from the community at large, although that is a part of it. It's the kind of breadth that we have coming into participate and the signal that sends for us as well. So that was really great to see. Looking at some of the figures, so we have about $20,000 worth of direct donations from 554 unique donors. I think that might actually be 555. So if you're that one, sorry. Projects supported per user. So this is one of the things that we've spoken about a little in previous calls, in this kind of halo effect that we're trying to lean into. We know that from Gitcoin grants, most people support, I think maybe the median is about 3.5. And the average is sometimes, I think, around 7 projects as part of a Gitcoin grants round. And we really wanted to try to replicate that. And we've seen that in a small way. We've seen the average number of projects that are supported per user is about 2 or 3, so 2.56. And I think that is enough of a signal for us to be continuing to look to that in future rounds, so that we can build out the existing functionality that we have around recommending similar projects when you're viewing a project or you're adding it to your cart. And then we have the kind of mechanics of democratic funding, in which we've seen kind of minimum match for the projects that had the largest number of donors at around 2.5 times from the match fund. And then for those projects that had a smaller amount of donations in total, we saw around a kind of 12x match, which was a good range. And that's kind of just to say, that for an individual, I think that it's very rare that you'll find an opportunity to kind of 2, 3, or 10x your own donation. So that was really good to see. Over the course of the round, we kind of saw a good kind of level of donations coming in, and this kind of models how we were allocating the match fund as we kind of went through the round on a day-to-day kind of basis. So you can see here donations coming in over the course of the 2 weeks campaign, and then the match fund kind of getting matched as we see more people coming in. You see that kind of drop in terms of trajectory because we see that kind of getting a degree of kind of weighting, and then total above there just coming just under 100,000. So that's that. And then very quickly, just here, I've got a bit of a distribution graph where we can see the donations and match fund allocations to the projects that were taking part. You might not be able to read that text, but you can see that Celia have been very successful in gaining a very broad kind of range of contributions from users, and they've done very well. So you can take it from me that I will be reaching out to the project team and learning from them of what kind of things worked for them, and we'll be sharing that with other projects and trying to build it into the process for the next round. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all I had to say on the round. We're really happy with where we've got to. Yeah, I think we've at least 2 or 3 times our personal kind of expectations for what we want to see in terms of participation and number of donations that we have coming in. So yeah, we are very, very happy. I don't have anything more to say myself. Does anybody else want to talk a little about the round kind of numbers?
Totally. Well, the thing I'll say is that Gitcoin Grants Round 1, which was in February of 2019, we did 35,000. So this has beaten, I think, any historical round 1 that Gitcoin has done. So hats off to the community, and thank you. This was a giant success. And I think that we're seeing generally positive feedback about the campaign, which makes Pia and Zach and I want to put in the time to do a round 2 and to make this into a quarterly thing. If you have feedback, then please drop it into the chat. Please let us know on Twitter. Please let us know however you would like, and we'll fold that into our plans for a round 2 for this campaign. But all in all, I'm very happy with how it went. And also, I think that I'd love to hear from Zach Herring, who we forgot to introduce at the top of this call, but was really one of the people that helped make all this happen behind the scenes. So hi, Zach, welcome to the Prezzo. And what do you think of the numbers? What do you think of this campaign?
I mean, I feel really good about them. I like round numbers, so 100K would have been great, but hey, we're close enough, in my opinion.
Something to shoot for next time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something to shoot for next time. No, I feel really good about it. I think, when you compare it with like some of the previous rounds, both on Gitcoin and some of the other projects that we've done, I think that the 2 point, usually like to me, like the superpower of quadratic funding to me is especially like the multiple donations number. Like, because then it's a co-opetition where everyone who brings in a new donor is potentially donating not just to them, but to everybody else or to others within the framework. And so really excited to see like 2.5. I think that's better than we've seen for some of the earlier projects. And then I also, that's something like for round 2, I think will be like one of the key metrics that we want to kind of like continue to improve upon and make it easier for people to find similar projects, make it easier for people to maybe back stacks of projects and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think it went great. I'm really excited about how
Totally. That was one of the metrics that I know we wanted to optimize for, was number of grants and number of collectives funded per every user who donated. And one of the reasons why I'm super passionate about that is that there's sometimes projects that have a huge audience that can bring in donators, but then there's also some projects that are maybe infrastructure projects and don't have good marketing. And the more you can cross-pollinate between those 2 types of projects, I think that's a really good mechanism. So yeah, definitely a KPI we're optimizing for. As we get more into discussion, do we maybe want to introduce our panel?
Yep. We should do that. So I have a slide for that. I think we've broadly all introduced ourselves, apart from I haven't introduced myself. I'm Ben from Open Source Collective and Open Collective as well. But yeah, joining us today, we have Vitalik from Ethereum and the co-author of the quadratic funding paper. Vitalik, I've never met you before, but hello.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, we're good. We're good. Thank you for joining us. We do not have a plan for this part of the conversation other than it is a conversation. So I guess we can't fail in doing that. I will say we are open to questions. I can't see any questions in the chat at the moment, but if you are looking to get an answer to a particular question, please feel free to ask either in chat or raise your hand and we can invite you onto the stage in inverted commas. And you can ask it and we will try to answer. And as Kevin has mentioned, we're also going to try and monitor social media on FundOSS to catch any questions that are coming in at that point. So yeah, I'm just going to hand over conversation. Carry on.
Totally. Well, Pia has been the ultimate partner in this campaign, and so I think I want to give Pia the opportunity to ask the first question of Vitalik. So go ahead,
Yeah,
Pia.
cool. Thank you. So I guess, I was hoping to get from you, like, what excites you about quadratic funding as a mechanism to kind of fund public goods in general? What kind of attracted you to that idea?
Again, I think the interesting thing about public funding or about quadratic funding is how it manages to be this a kind of open and democratic mechanism for actually determining where money that goes that's intended toward funding public goods gets directed to. So, like, there isn't some small committee that's kind of running the mechanism that's also actually deciding, who it ends up getting it. Like, the entire thing is emergent, right? Like, you don't, like, it's even better than quadratic voting in that sense, because in a quadratic voting system, like, you still need someone to choose who gets voted on. But in quadratic funding, like, everything is emergent, right? Anyone can start projects, anyone that donates to projects, and then those donations just get matched, right? And there's something very elegant about that kind of scheme. There's like a kind of scheme has the property that, like, it should be able to easily adapt to many kinds of different kinds of circumstances, many different kinds of communities. It's I think has the potential of getting information from all of the different people in the community about what kinds of things are important to them, and ensuring that those projects actually get support. And, like, that's a problem that to me is not just theoretical. I think it's also very real, right? Like, we, even within the Ethereum community, for example, there have been many cases of just projects that the community really or lots of people in the community, it could even just be a minority in the community, understands that they're really important to them, but where that information doesn't naturally trickle up to the kinds of people that would normally be running grants committees, for example. Yeah, I think quadratic voting does a good job of kind of eliciting that information from people.
I understand that very well, and I think it's a beautiful mechanism for kind of signaling community interest, and kind of, I guess, solving a little bit of the asymmetry of information between funders and projects. I'm curious about how the kind of economic incentives are panning out for the projects, in the sense that because I know that these were questions that we had, but what are the incentives of, like, communities to get backers for across all projects when there's a little bit of a competition for the matching pool? And I know that, like, in Gitcoin, in the Gitcoin runs, we've seen, like, a really high number of projects backed by, like, backers. But why do you think that happens when there's, like, this little bit of a competitive mechanism happening for the pool?
Yeah, that's definitely an important point. I mean, I think even if there's a competitive mechanism, like, it's still not zero sum, right? Because at the end of the day, things get funded, and at the end of the day, I think the ecosystem benefits when people provide, like, all of this information about what things are important to them. So I think there definitely is still some, like, intrinsic value of just being able to participate in the process of expressing your voice, and like that is in some ways what you're doing as part of giving these grants that end up influencing the quadratic matching pool, right? And, like, sure, sometimes people end up disagreeing and have different opinions, but the result is still like an outcome that's like it's something that's very valuable for the ecosystem to get. So I think, like, people still appreciate participating in that process. And at the same time, like, some of the, like, not all the grants actually come from the matching pool, right? Like, the grants that people provide themselves do still end up being, like, a very big part of the amounts that projects end up getting at the end.
Kev, do you want to?
Yeah, well, definitely want to put the audience in the highlight here as much as possible, and I see that Miguel has a question. We can bring him up on stage, Benjam, if he wants to ask it, or I can just repeat the question.
I can certainly try and do that if Miguel is happy to do so. It's all good.
I'll ask another question while we're figuring that out. And the question that I had, Vitalik, is that at this point we're starting to see different flavors of QF develop. Obviously Gitcoin grants in the Ethereum community. We have CLR Fund. We have seen Rad Exchange launch a quadratic voting application. And then we have had downtown stimulus, which was quadratic funding for COVID relief in downtown Boulder. And we've now seen quadratic funding or democratic funding for regular open source. You had mentioned how the mechanism was designed to be extensible from the start and apply in many different communities. And I'm wondering if there's anything that surprised you as you've started to see many different flavors of QF blossom over the last year and a half.
There were definitely a lot of unexpected, just interesting. I don't even want to say challenges. I want to say quirks of how the mechanism ended up colliding with reality in different ways. For example, the discussions around Gitcoin grants in Ethereum had this section for tech, and it also had this section for community. And is this basically a kind of some kind of decentralized Ethereum state propaganda arm? That was this criticism that we got on Twitter as a result. And on the other hand, there were people who had these opinions that Twittering isn't real work, and Twittering doesn't deserve to be paid $20,000 in the same way that programming does. And that's philosophically fascinating, because this whole concept of deserving and the idea of mechanism design, right, is that you're trying to actually get information about what people really value and sort of separate that out from kind of these prejudices about what things should be valuable that people have in the abstract. And I think the result is that people do find Twittering to be, and even that kind of thought leadership to be, something that's still meaningful and important. So that's I think one of my comments on one of my review posts is that I thought that was a result that it's should be respected, and it's good that we're respecting. And then the question of is this going to support projects or support things that end up negatively affecting the Ethereum community's relations with other communities. That's interesting too on a couple of levels, right? That was interesting because, first of all, economics, it assumes it often assumes non-coordination, right? It assumes that people make decisions based on their judgments independently, and these dynamics of what happens when organized communities start interacting with other organized communities. That's something that's more difficult to predict, and there's actually kind of fundamental economic reasons why you can't have perfect mechanisms that solve those kinds of problems. And so this is the sort of thing where I think my conclusion is that we just have to kind of figure it out, and we have to just sort of figure out what happens experimentally, kind of pivot if we have to start just do the best job that we can experimentally. And the other thing, of course, was this sort of positive impact versus negative impact divide, and can quadratic funding actually deal with those issues? So that was one very fascinating bigger example. Other examples that I saw was that quadratic funding was originally meant for funding, and then people started using it for a kind of de facto signaling, right? The EIP 1559 grant was a good example there. It was used for people as a way to show support, this is something that we consider to be important. And we want to just throw money in and just show people that hey, lots of people believe this is a really big deal and deserve support. So I expect that as quadratic funding gets bigger and bigger, then it's going to be something that is going to we're going to see more and more sort of interesting discoveries of that type, and we'll see how that goes.
I guess I have one quick follow-up question for you before we bring Miguel up on stage. Vitalik, I think it was about 10 years ago, there was a study that was published that estimated the total economic impact of open source software to be $500 billion. I think it was per year. It might have just been $500 billion total. And I think that FundOSS, we just did a 100K campaign. Gitcoin's doing about $1 million campaigns right now. Do you think quadratic funding can scale up to $500 billion?
I definitely think it can. I think there's two challenges to this. So one challenge is actually getting the funds, right? So I think up until now, we've gotten the funds mainly from I think stage one was individual volunteers, but individual volunteers can only scale up so much because you have one individual that's basically suffering the entire cost of funding this round, and they're getting only a small portion of the benefit, and even worse, they're basically sacrificing their ability to decide which benefit it is they're directing their money to. Stage two is organized projects of any kind, right? And the reason why organized projects, I think, have potentially a larger volume is because first of all, organized projects represent many people, and so there's no single person that's going to be losing all of the money that the project ends up contributing. But also, organized projects, I think, can actually benefit from contributing, right? Because it basically gives them this community legitimacy, and it kind of establishes them as this pro-public good community actor. And I think we maybe even see that effect in other contexts, right? Even just one example, if you see, the Shiba Inu token, which sort of got, turned into a de facto charity coin, and then a month later Coinbase listed them. I have no idea why Coinbase listed them, but part of me kind of hopes that they did it because it was a charity token. But I think those just whenever you have a project that's operating inside of kind of interconnected ecosystem, there's often this sort of leverage that you can get from doing things that are helpful to people. So that's stage two. But then stage three is much bigger projects and even things outside the crypto space. So option one is we convince major players outside the crypto space. Option two is the crypto space just ends up getting really big. And then there's option three, right? There's if there's completely new sources of say property rights that emerge because of new technology that can get auctioned off to pay for quadratic funding rounds, and that would be interesting, but that's more kind of futuristic, and we'll see. So that's problem one. Problem two, I think, is making sure that the mechanism actually survives the level of collusion and the level of powerful mainstream actors trying to influence the outcome that we'll see at scale, right? Because once you play the big game, the big game is a scary game, right? And if you've been watching the media, all of the complaints about are the Ruskies trying to influence the election? Are these people trying to bribe the politicians? Are these people funding ads in foreign countries to support these movements? Is that something that should be prevented? Is that not? And you get into this big game with these very powerful and sophisticated actors, and quadratic funding is going to have to come to terms with its version of that and make sure that it can just deal with that very sophisticated level of collusion when it comes. But the good news is that it's growing slowly over time, so I guess it should be able to the transition should not be too sudden, but we'll see.
I think, Vitalik, that is very especially kind of dangerous in a mechanism that puts a reward to popularity, right? Where essentially what you're doing is putting a price on something being, hot and noticeable and popular, not necessarily critical, right?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent that's true already, right? If you can influence which political candidate is popular, the tax consequences of that could be in the hundreds of billions of dollars. But quadratic funding just makes it so much more explicit and gives you more rapid feedback. So yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, when we were running this campaign, if you think about that, because like sometimes the most popular projects are not necessarily the ones that are most critical, and especially in like open source kind of core infrastructure, you have projects that, you know, they're sustaining the whole freaking internet and no one is funding and no one notices, and you know, OpenSSL, yes, but also 100 other projects like that. And this particular mechanism seems to be skewed towards, like, against them, right? Because it's skewed towards those projects who are most popular. So how do you all are thinking about this? I'm just curious.
So like the mechanism being overly skewed in favor of projects that are already popular.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is one of those things that I've like struggled against a lot. I think one answer is just that, like, looking at it empirically. I think in one of my recent review posts, I've tried to look at, like, well, you know, how much new blood is there, how much old blood is there, and like my response. A response there was basically that, well, at the very least, it doesn't seem like entrenchment is growing. It seems like there's actually a fairly kind of constant and healthy amount of new blood coming in. But if that stops, or if that changes over time, then there's two ways of dealing with that. Like, one way is to try to change the interface, right? To change the interface to try to be less supportive of projects that, or less prominently display projects that have a kind of historically been very successful, or at least try to kind of highlight particularly new and interesting ones more. Another idea might be to try to mix quadratic funding with other kinds of economic mechanisms. So, like, for example, prediction markets on future success, right? Like, if you can identify a project that becomes a really successful quadratic funding recipient, like, say, 3 rounds from now, then, like, you could get rewarded from that. And then we can look at, like, what projects people are predicting might get future rewards. So I think there is room to do really interesting experiments with kind of predictive and retroactive stuff like that too. But again, like, in general, I think, like, the answer is that, like, it's just, we don't really know exactly which of these ideas will work. So we just have to keep looking at the data and keep experimenting more.
Thanks, Vitalik. I feel really bad for Miguel, who we promised we would bring up on stage like 10 minutes ago, and we never did.
Yes, sorry.
I think Miguel's happier for us to kind of read the question. So as a bit of context, Miguel is one of the founders of Celia that has done very well out of this first round. Congratulations to them. They work on open source kind of drug discovery for health research. So they're trying to kind of lower the boundaries for the development of new drugs, especially where the kind of costs are prohibitive, and building technologies to do that. So very much of the moment and of the time. That may be why we have the result that we have for this round. But yeah, I think the question is just very broadly about encouraging other people to donate to projects that are different from their own, that kind of halo effect, and how to kind of, spread the love, I guess, for the individual donor, which we have seen a bit on this round, but I think we would love to see more of in the future. So I think that's something personally that we're going to continue to lean into. One of the things that we didn't do for this round, but we kind of thought through, was how to group like projects. We didn't necessarily group projects that were in similar domains or tackling similar problems. But I know that one of the things that you've done with Gitcoin Grants is also tranching some of the fund itself. Kevin, maybe do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, totally. So when you're talking about tranching, are you talking about like grouping projects together so they can all be funded together?
Yeah, I think there's an aspect of how the match fund is allocated that's kind of relevant to that as well. It might be worth mentioning.
Yeah, totally. So we've got this thing called collections, which is basically like anyone can bundle a collection of grants together and market them together. which enables decentralized discovery of which grants are popular, or which, like, basically a grant being viewed is an indicator that it might get funded down the line. And so if you can put together projects that are in different categories, or, you know, just like different parts of the taxonomy together so that they're funded together, there's kind of like an economy of scale there, where one of my hopes is, and this goes back to Pia's question, is that we can bundle together projects that have a large audience and projects that are critically important but have no audience, and maybe the mechanism can fund both of those. I'm sorry, I don't know if that was exactly the question you're asking, but
yeah, that's a good idea. Another thing that we were thinking about is maybe having like public cards. Like, so if someone is like a referent in like an area, or is doing like a lot of work in, you know, a specific space, you want to maybe just mimic how they distributed their donations. And so being able to replicate, and again, goes to the kind of lowering the symmetry of information that this kind of mechanism can help. So that's something that I would like to do. And then another idea that we also discussed, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, is like to dial down the competitive aspect and like enhance maybe the cooperation or cooperative aspect of the mechanism, is to assign a percentage of the donation to a project back into the matching fund, right? So so it's not just all going to a project, but there's also it also like a percentage of that donation gets distributed to all other projects via the matching pool.
right. So I think that maybe one difference that I've noticed between the Ethereum community and in this experiment was that people didn't really like the idea that once the cap is hit, that they're going to be taking funds away from each other. Actually, I think the Ethereum community has given that feedback as well. So we've been sort of brainstorming various ways to make it feel more positive sum game and less negative.
Yeah, that's it's definitely something like I've noticed as well. Do you have any particularly good ideas for that?
It's not my idea, but someone had an idea of, instead of giving a match amount to each project, give like shares of the matching pool, and then you can just kind of like inflate those shares. That's just a psychological like trick
Right.
to make people feel like it's less positive, or maybe it doesn't actually change.
Or we've also talked in the Ethereum community about, once the cap is reached, just end the round within 24 hours. So that way there's way less time where it's a negative sum game.
Right. I think the one thing that feels painful to projects is when at the beginning they go up and it seems like they've got this really big match and like they're like $45,000 or whatever, and then it just from then on keeps on diluting, and they have to keep watching it diluting for a long time. So,
Yeah. I think that was a very strong feedback, because like someone came in, made a donation, it was matched with, I don't know, like X. And then next time they wanted to make a donation, it was like X minus, you know, $200. And they're like, why? Why is this like my money diluting like that? So there's also, I think, something in the design of how we did things that, you know, we can improve those perceptions.
I wonder, one of the ideas that I had, Vitalik, I'd be curious what you think of this one, is like, say we reach our 75K cap where the whole pool is allocated. We basically start to take people's ire around the negative sum game, and we collect it in some way. And like Pia and I go out like hat in hand to like, I don't know, anyone who we think could be a prospective matching pool sponsor. And we say like, hey, look, like, don't let the momentum stop. This campaign is going, and like, you could be the savior that keeps the infinite game, the positive sum game going.
Oh, interesting. I think you can combine these ideas, right? Because what you can say is, once you get to the cap, the round ends in 24 hours, but then you also have a public call and says like, hey, if anyone wants to continue the game, then they can like go in and match. And if they match enough, then the timer resets, or just like cancels until the new cap is matched, is hit.
And we will lionize you for helping us in the round, you know?
Yeah. That's a good idea. Do you want to read maybe, Benjamin, some messages from the chat?
Yeah, you're assuming that I've been reading the chat. 1 second.
Sorry. I think
so there was a couple of comments about visualizing donations. I think there was a point at which, we switched from where we were effectively visualizing a model of the match fund relative to the actual distribution at the end, which I quite liked. So other points, someone suggested us just try different time periods. Yes, I can discuss that. So given the failure of the value created in open source to be captured by creators / developers, the 500B, are there any thoughts on reframing the narrative around open source in Web3 so it resonates more deeply and more broadly? What does the narrative around open source look like if you start from scratch? Okay.
I guess my question for this would be like, what is the goal of reframing the narrative, right? Like if your challenge is that open source projects are just not able to capture enough value, then like by reframing the narrative, like what are we accomplishing? Are we just like giving them more social brownie points? Like there's a limit to which you can pay people with social brownie points if open source is being like horribly underfunded, right? So at some, like I think the goal is more to kind of change the institutional structure somehow so that open source projects do get more funding. And I mean, maybe that requires creating narratives that like encourage people or even projects to be that funder more. But
Yeah. I will say it's been sort of interesting being the blockchain guy and walking into this large non-blockchain community and having them sort of, I feel like some people have prejudged us because our name is Gitcoin, but some people have also been pretty open-minded. And I'll just say that PIA Open Collective and Open Source Collective have been the ultimate partners in helping us kind of bring this idea to a new audience. So maybe they'll.
No, and the blockchain and open source software worlds definitely needs to talk to each other more. I mean, I think a lot of us even think of blockchains as being like stateful open source programs, right? Like you have programs that you control, and now you have programs that you control that can share things, allow collaboration between multiple people. I think the different relationship of the two communities to like the money aspect of it is like definitely one of the, I think, the kind of big challenges, but like that's something that can be, I think, much more collaborative too.
I've found just anecdotally that it feels like the Ethereum community is much more promiscuous in testing out new like financial rewards for things. And I think that there's like a stigma to money in open source in money and earning outside of that. I don't know, Pia, I'd be curious for your comments on that.
No, I mean, I agree, obviously, from, with I guess the free software movement. And look, when we started Open Collective and the Open Source Collective, and we started talking about money in open source 5 years ago, I really thought that it was going to be much worse. Like that aspect of like, oh, you're paying for people to do, volunteer open source work. You are like, Microsoft. I was expecting that, and that didn't happen. Like we weren't so strongly called out for introducing like financial incentives into the open source ecosystem as I thought we were going to be. I think there was a clear kind of need for, a more sustainable ecosystem to be built, and we were just part of that kind of process. I think by the time we started, it was very clear that all the value that was being created by communities was captured outside of those communities. And it was about time that, we tried to kind of retain that value in the communities that were creating it. Yeah. So Henry from Babel on the chat has this idea of like, hang on. If we could do like a Twitch subathon that each subscriber match increases the length of the stream, in this case, like a funding round, right? Like that's another idea that we can kind of think of. And I think that
is that going to involve me being on a stream for like 48 hours straight?
Playing ping pong, Henry, playing ping pong.
Almost.
Why not? I think Nick Vidal had a hand raised for a while. Do we have a path for giving him a mic? Or I'm not sure how on earth this works. Hand mic. Oh, he's gone. Oh, wait.
Like this.
He's on stage. Hi, Nick.
Hello, Pia. Hey, everyone. Can you see me? I guess not. Let me share my screen here. Okay, now it's better. Hey, folks. First of all, I would like to congratulate Pia for this type of partnership and experiment. Was really interesting, really nice. And it's a way for us to understand and learn more of other ways of contributing, right? So thank you so much, Pia, for that. I don't have so much of a question, but I do have some ideas. I did work some time for the OSI, the Open Source Initiative, and we did a celebration of the 20 years of open source. And what we thought was a good way we wanted to fundraise as well. And we thought one way was to organize events. Events has always been a very good way to fundraise, because you gather people. People like to gather together, to talk, to meet each other. Especially now, post-COVID, people want to meet each other, eat together, have a coffee break. Perhaps, so this is just an idea, an element that we could add to FundOSS and quadratic funding, is to add a real events, in-person events, where people can actually come together, and all the projects involved, they could organize like a small conference or just a kind of a coffee break and something really nice. So that's just one idea post-pandemic where we can all meet together.
Yep, I wouldn't complain. I think that for at least the sustained community, the event was yearly event that we put together was like pivotal to growing this conversation. And I know that in the Ethereum community, the gatherings and unicorns and are very important. So yeah, for sure. I'm not sure how that would work, but I would love to organize an event in person.
Yeah. Just to attest to the power of events, I think Pia, Benjam, and I first time I had met them was at Sustain in London, which was an event that y'all organized. So definitely a fertile breeding ground for partnerships to grow. And I agree. And also, I think it's cool that you worked for OSI. Thanks so much for showing up.
Thanks, Nick.
Cool.
I was going to say, I'm definitely feeling like the Sustain community would love an opportunity to be able to get back together. And that's, an example of one of the other kind of initiatives that we do. This is just one of many kind of things that we're doing in the space. And just kind of coming back to some of the conversation about funding work that is popular and funding work that is necessary. I think there is a space to bridge between the two, but also we will continue to kind of do initiatives that focus on either of those things as well. I know that Open Source Collective has done projects in the past like Back Your Stack, where we're focusing just on software that is in your dependency tree versus projects that are popular or voted on by the community. And I think that's going to continue to be a part of that. But yeah, above all of that, I think getting together and having these conversations and trying to explore not only like the practicalities of a particular campaign or a particular project that we want to take in, but just kind of having these connections. Because yeah, I remember meeting you, Kevin. It was a couple of years ago, 3 years ago maybe. And yeah, look at us now. So yeah, doing more of that, I think is going to be great in the future.
Cool. All right, babes. That was. Do we have something else from the audience, or do we want to wrap this one up with a big? What do we do? Hooray! Thank you. A clap. How does it work?
How are you?
All right, there we go. The Vitalik clap. Thank you so much, everyone. This has been amazing to work with you all, and I hope that we get to do it again sometime soon.
Next round.
Agreed.
Yes.
Next round.
How long?
Yeah.
Let's start fundraising and see how we get some traction this time. Vitalik, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.